All right, on this first example, what we're trying to do is figure out what x is. So I'm going to find out what x is by doing the inverse operation. So the inverse of squaring something would be taking the square root. So whatever I would do to the left side, I have to do to the right side. So on the left side, I get x, and on the right side, I get 2. But if you'll go back and think about the problem, if I think about all the numbers that would work for x, 2 is one of those numbers. But what else would work for x? Negative 2. So there are 2 answers that work when you're solving for x. So when you're solving a problem and you take the square root of both sides, you'll have the plus and minus of the answer. You talked about this in your previous math classes. But whenever you are solving this problem, to find x, you would take the square root of both sides. And when you did this in your previous math classes, your teacher would say, nope, can't take a square root of a negative. So you would say, there's no answer. And you might have even said no solution or something like that. But your teacher probably said, in this case, x would be no real solution. And you just said, well, you can't take the square root of a negative, so you didn't get an answer. But the truth is that there is no real solution to this answer. So if there's no real solution, there must be an imaginary solution. So today we're going to talk about a new set of numbers that we call the imaginary numbers. So we're going to use the imaginary set of numbers to solve problems that have a negative under a square root. Probably sometime in about 7th grade you did a Venn diagram and the teacher labeled it with real numbers, and you would talk through the whole set of numbers, and the teacher would say you have counting numbers, you have integers, you have rational numbers. So numbers like decimals, fractions, whole numbers, other numbers like decimals like 1.5, these are all real numbers. Other real numbers are irrational numbers like square root of 2, because it's a decimal that never repeats. Pi is irrational. But what your teacher didn't say is there's a whole nother set of numbers over here called imaginary numbers. And the imaginary numbers has the unit, or the imaginary unit is I. And when we write this, we try to write an italicized I. And I is the square root of -1. That means the same thing as the square root of -1. So I squared means the same thing as -1. So you're thinking, when would I ever use imaginary numbers? Well, in some of your engineering classes you might see this. We'll use it in a little bit when we're talking about roots of polynomials. Electrical engineers use I when they're doing circuits. So this is something that we'll be using quite a bit of. If you're a little foggy or you want a better explanation of this, you could look at Khan Academy and type in complex numbers or imaginary numbers.